My name is Amanda Gibson, and I'm an artist. I am an artist because I enjoy doing what I do, and it provides me with a way to challenge myself. It's never boring, especially as I am a multimedia artist, which for me that means I work in a variety of mediums, sometimes combining them, sometimes separately. It means if I'm temporarily bored with something or if I'm finding I'm having a mental block, I can switch projects to something that's completely new, completely separate, and just kind of relax into it. It also means I get to work with a variety of materials, and it's always a joy to be able to make something out of objects people wouldn't normally think you could make things out of. I personally went to the Massachusetts College of Art and Design and received a bachelor's in fine arts in illustration. Um, a lot of people, when I was a freshman, were surprised that I chose illustration as my major. At Mass Art, as a freshman, everyone has the same core classes just to make sure everyone's up to snuff and all that. And even then, I was doing a lot of hands-on work, building things, and people thought I'd go into sculpture. And my thought process then is the same as it is now, and that is that sculpture is something that I find you can usually find a way to teach yourself the techniques, either by people around you, videos on the internet, classes outside of college. If you have the techniques, you can do it. But illustration was something that I view as more of a mindset. It's taking techniques that you know and trying to use them to tell a story to the viewer. I also, in my senior year, took a few electives in the sculpture department that were based towards puppet making, which at first glance you wouldn't think that puppetry and puppet making would have anything related to miniatures and sculpture, but despite size differences in the size of the projects, they share a lot of the same materials and tools and problem-solving issues. So it makes it easy, at least for me, to switch between making a giant puppet or a prop for a theater and making a miniature set that could be photographed for a 2D illustration. A lot of my illustrations in college were built and looked actually like stop motion sets for animation sets, but would then be photographed to have the 2D image if you didn't want to look at just the straight art piece. After college, I've continued to grow my skills through personal experimentation as well as some online classes and just on-the-job work. My current career path is a combination of things. I do work part-time for my family's landscaping business, but I'm also a professional puppet maker for theaters and companies and the like. I also do props and I sell small sculpture online. Miniature projects have a bit of a side business in recent times, though I do plan on expanding and doing more within that sphere of my knowledge. I get a lot of my influence from stories. Similar to how I went to be an illustration major to tell stories, I get a lot of my influences from stories I've heard. And the end goal, no matter if I'm making a puppet or making a miniature, is always to tell a story. So if I'm making some mythical bird puppet, I don't want to just make, I'm going to make this fuzzy, sparkly bird, and it's going to be pretty, and it's going to be great. I want to be like, why is it this way? How would this interact with its environment? It kind of feeds into the research aspect of why do certain animals in the real world have these traits? Like I actually did make a fantasy bird, and the idea was it was similar to a kakapo in that it is a ground dwelling bird, but so it had very small like small wings, again similar to also a kiwi, but sturdy legs and a strong beak, because I feel like that would be what it would use to hunt and gather. But it was colorful because in the idea, these birds would lay their eggs in underground burrows near precious stones, and the young would take on the color of whatever stone. I believe the stone I used for that one was fluorite, so it had a pinky purple iridescent coloring to it. And it always was fun to be able to have an actual story and reasoning to tell people that saw the puppet. Similar to making miniature sets, you want to tell a story with them. Like, if I build a room, what would that room entail? Who's living in the room? What objects are in the room? If I'm making an object, why would it be like this? Would this object have like deterioration somewhere on it? If it's a book, would the pages be crumpled? Things like that. I get a lot of influence from artists around me. Red Nose Studios is a 3D illustrator who's done a lot of work building 3D illustrations, sculpting them, painting them, and photographing them for magazines and children's books, etc. Paper Heart Puppets is someone I actually trained under briefly, who has a show called Cardboard Explosion. The show is completely done with cardboard puppets and sets, and it's really an imaginative show and a lot of interaction. Some big names that I get influence from is like Tim Burton, Studio Ghibli, Critical Role, Welcome to Night Vale. I love quirky things with a whimsical twist, and you can tell have a lot of personality and hard work put into them. Some favorite authors include Neil Gaiman, Brian Jakes, just stories that have a lot of, like, I don't know, meat to them, but also a lot of heart to them, and just, I don't know, it just makes your brain work. I also get a lot of inspiration from the artists I follow on Twitter and Instagram. You can get a lot of inspiration from your peers. My family and personal experiences are also big influences in my art. I generally find it's very hard to completely separate your art from who you are. And I guess I don't know if there's any reason you should. What I want to talk about right now is my process in making miniature sets and sculpture. I use a variety of materials when creating a miniature set, most of them being random found objects or materials. But if I need something very specific or something very organic looking, I tend to use super sculpey or sculpey in general to create the objects that I need. I usually use super sculpey. It's pink, kind of peachy toned. I like it better than original sculpey just because I think that it holds details for small sculptures better than the original stuff. Usually I will make something out of the super sculpey, and then I will bake it and paint it with acrylic paint to get specific colors. However, if I can find a really good base color in colored sculpey, I will just use the straight colored sculpey as the base. And generally I find that those colors are extremely vibrant and can be used as is once it's baked, or could be painted on top of to create more detailed finishes. Colored sculpey is also good because if you want to give something a weathered look, you can take a piece of sandpaper and sand down a section, and it'll still keep the color that was underneath to just be a little more roughed up looking. So yeah, so super sculpey comes in a variety of colors. Got a couple here now. I've got like blue, got white, I've got tan colors, And it's interesting the differences between something painted and something that was just straight using the colored Sculpey. And I have a couple things to show as examples. So I've worked on a couple, I don't know if I would call these miniature sets, but they are almost dioramas. I have several of these glass teacups, and I wanted to make scenes inside. And one that I did is this one. It is a lighthouse island with a clear epoxy for the water. This was done using super Sculpey and then painted, and then the epoxy was poured in for the water. This one, the mushrooms and the ladybugs are all done with colored Sculpey. So there's straight white Sculpey, red Sculpey, and then the ladybugs are red Sculpey, and then I took black Sharpie for the black parts, and then a little bit of white paint for the spots in the eyes. So, as you can see, both ways work great. It's really whatever you're trying to go for at the time. If you don't have paint, though, the colored Sculpey is great, because again, you could just leave it as the base colors. You can take two different colors Sculpeys and mix them together and try and change the color a little bit if you don't have quite what you want either. If you're looking at Sculpey, there's a variety of things you can make out of it. I tend to actually make, unless I'm making specific objects for miniature sets, I actually enjoy making animal pieces or foods, which are fun. So, again, I have a couple of things here. So one of the earliest critter sculptures, which I sell, that I made was a fruit bat, and this was an albino one. I don't know if I can get it to look really detailed on here, but it's sculpted with the furs applied after the fact. I paint the eyes and everything separately. And this one's more of a newer one. It's a beagle. But all of these start off with just clay, and this is from a bear that I'm doing. I will take the clay and I'll take something, usually like a large round bead, like made of wood, something specifically made out of wood actually, to build the head or the other piece on if I'm doing something like this, because if it's a piece of wood, I actually can put it directly in the oven and it won't burn or singe the clay or anything. I have a soft one as well. But I also, like I said, I also do food. So I've got a variety of little cakes and such, and do sushi. Your imagination's honestly the limit. As for things I use to actually sculpt the Sculpey, I have this one tool that, here it is, I use a lot. I actually, it's the only one I use really, is it's got two ends on it, and if you look close, you'll see there is a little ball on the end of the point, so it's not actually pointed. So when you're sculpting, it doesn't cut into the clay. And then this one's a little smaller on this side. But before I got this, and I started using this for everything, I actually just used barbecue skewers or toothpicks, and they work great. You can do anything you need to with just that. Once the object you're trying to make is finished and you're sculpted it, Super Sculpey is a polymer clay. It's oven baked, so that means it doesn't harden by just being in the air. This piece of clay is fairly old and it's still usable. So you actually have to bake Super Sculpey, whatever you're using, in the oven. Now I always recommend that you read the instructions on your package of Sculpey before you cook it, because sometimes different versions of sculpey will have different cook times, etc. Usually it is 275 degrees for 15 minutes for every 1/4 inch of thickness to your piece. If you're worried about something being overcooked, I wouldn't worry too much, but you can do it in like 5-minute intervals, and so you can check it every now and then if you're worried about it. The great thing about sculpey is it's something that you can work right in your home when you don't need a huge amount of space. So a lot of times with the smaller projects, I'll actually work at my desk at my home, and I don't have to go to the studio, unlike with the puppets. If it helps, you can always do a little sketch or put some images together for inspiration before you start. But otherwise, have fun with it. Right now, I would like to take you through actually creating a piece out of sculpey, just to show some techniques that I briefly talked about before. You usually will start with the basic shape of whatever you're doing. So let's say I've made several pieces of cake. So let's say with this one, it started out as, this one I left as a cheesecake, but the basic shape is just a slice. And then you take that slice, if you wanted to vary it, and you'd add texture. So would take that one, and you see the textures on the sides that separate from the icing, just is done after. And then you would add the details, like the whipped cream on top or the extra icing, after you've done it. So base, texture, add-ons. Similar with the bears and the other creatures I showed you. You'll start with the basic flat shape, and then you'll add the texture after the fact, and then you add any extra details. Like I believe I did the base with the ears, then textured it, then added the nose to this. With the feet, you make the base, then the fur texture, then the little toe beans. And that's actually really easy to do with that specific texture, because it's just, you take the clay and you make a bunch of little stippling marks, and then you make layers of stippling marks, and you keep doing that until you get the texture that you want. Now, today, the project I'm going to work you through is how to make a miniature pie, because I think this specific food will give you an insight on how to make other foods. You only need 3 colors of sculpey. If you're using colored sculpey, you need something to be the base of the pie, so like the pie tin, something to be the pie crust, and something to be the pie filling. Okay, so with the pie, I want to start with the base, which is, in this case, since you're not going to be cutting the pie into slices, it's going to be what would be the pie tin, and I'm going to start with white for that. So I've got the basic shape I want is a disc, but if I want the edges to be cleaner, I would just roll it against a hard surface until it gets the really sharper corners that I want. And whichever side looks better will be at the bottom, because that's the side you'll see. Then the next step is take whatever filling you want this pie to have. In this case, I'm going to do blueberry. I'm going to take a little piece of blue sculpey, and I'm going to flatten it out. Now, you can flatten it out directly on a table, but you run the risk of it sticking to the surface and then ripping when you try and pull it up. So I actually have a piece that I have the right size for this already, but it's thin. It's basically just to give a background pop of color inside the pie. And you'll take that and you'll stick it on top of the pie base so that it's nice and attached. Now, when you think of a pie, at least when I do, I think the filling isn't just a flat jelly. It's more chunky. There's bits of fruit or whatever's in it. So you'll want to take more of that filling color and you want to roll it into a long rope, like still pretty thin, but a long rope. And then you can just take your fingers and break tiny bits off. They don't have to be perfect, and just chunk this thing up until you have a really kind of bumpy texture. You're not going to see the whole thing through the pie crust, but you'll see just enough to keep it interesting to the viewer. Another warning I have is if you're using a really vibrant color, like say blue or red, and you're using another really light color like white, be careful about color transference, because sometimes the brighter color will bleed and leave some color on your fingers. That won't stay on your fingers much, but it could end up coloring the lighter color, like the white. I think that's one more. That's pretty bumpy. Okay. So next thing is you'll take whatever your pie crust color is, and that I'm using a tan color, and you want to flatten it out. Again, you can just straight flatten it out on a surface, but I tend to do it with my fingers first, just to get most of it, and then use the surface to flatten it out after the fact just a little bit more, because again, it does stick. So normally I use this tool with the rounded ends on it, but today I'm going to just use a barbecue skewer, because I feel like it might be more easily accessible for people if they don't want to go and get one of these, because you can get these at like the supermarket. But you'll take this flat section and you'll cut an edge off of it, because right now we're making the strips of the pie crust, because I want to make this a cross-hatch pie. So I want little strips of this stuff. So you want it pretty thin, and you want to cut the pieces to be pretty thin. So that's one. I recommend making at least 6 of these little strips, because you want to have 3 going in each direction at least, just to give it a really even look to it. So yeah, you'll do this 6 times. Similar to the pie base, I actually already made several of these, so just to speed this up a little. And you'll put it over. It's okay if it hangs over the edges. We'll take care of that in this minute. And then you'll take the next one and you'll go across like this. So there's a little X in the corner there, right? And then you'll take another one and it'll go over the one you just did in this direction. You're basically braiding these. And then you'll take another one and you want to flip over that first one because you want it to go underneath that one. Stick a little, there we go, and flop down. So you've got a nice, it's a nice cross pattern on here. So next, you can take your tool and just pinch off the extras on the ends and kind of pat down the ends a little bit too so they stick a little better to the edges. Careful not to damage the base too much, but if it's just the top part where it connects to the top of the pie, it's not really an issue because it's going to get covered next. There we go. So that's already looking much more pie-like, right? So then you'll take whatever spare stuff you have and you'll roll it into a really long snake. And this one needs to be long enough to go around the entire pie because you want it to go around the edges like this and cover up wherever those pie pieces connect to the pie itself. And then you'll take You'll pat everything down just a little bit to make sure everything's nice and cohesive and sticks. And then pat. And you'll use that tool again just to crimp the edges like that. Now, you'll notice that a couple of my pieces in the middle did get a little smushed by my thumb, and that's okay. It happens sometimes, but you can take your tool and just kind of clean up the edges a little bit if you want, or you can leave it, because you know, no pie is perfect. And sometimes that roughness can actually add a lot to something that's supposed to be this organic looking. But you will then take, so this is basically it for the pie. You'll then take it and you'll put it on a baking sheet and you'll put it in the oven. Again, always check the specifics of your sculpey to see how long it should bake for. This pie, my sculpey says to bake for 275 degrees Fahrenheit. For 15 minutes for every 1/4 inch of thickness. And this is about a 1/4 inch thick. So I would put this in the oven for just 15 minutes. You can either put it directly on the pan or put a layer of tinfoil or wax paper, something oven safe between it. But always remember to wash your pans afterwards, especially if they're going to be used for food after you've been baking sculpey. One last thing. I did make a pie earlier. I wanted to show you real quick that how you can use like just markers to make some more detailing. So you can see half of this is the basic pie, and then you can see more color on this half, and that's using just a permanent marker for the brown and whiteout actually for the white, because you want to take the darker color and just go on the edges wherever you think a real pie in the oven would crisp up more. You can even, like, anywhere it bulges, be like, oh man, that pie would crisp up right there, kind of thing. And just do that wherever you think it needs it. And I always do the edges, because the edges always crisp up on pies. But with the whiteout, you can just, because I always see pies that have like sugar or something powdered on the top. You just make a couple dots with this and then pat it real quick just to smear it, and it looks like powdered sugar was dropped all over it. I think with this you could probably have enough to start making your own foods. Just remember, similar to the color inside the pies, you don't need to fill the inside of the pie with the pretty blue color or whatever color it is. You just need to do what's going to be seen. And I guess my challenge for everyone, because everyone needs a challenge, is I would love if you all could try, and if you could try and make your own favorite food out of sculpey. Just have fun with it.